All right, listen up everyone, because what I'm about to tell you from last night's Sportcenter is absolutely wild. And if you're a Warriors fan or a Kings fan, you need to hear every single word of this. So I'm sitting there watching the show, and they drop this bombshell report from Sam Amick of The Athletic. And I literally had to rewind it because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The Jonathan Kuminga trade talks between Golden State and Sacramento, the ones that everybody thought were dead, completely off the table after the Warriors shut down all sign-and-trade conversations at basically the 11th hour. They're back on. I'm talking full-blown negotiations happening again, and we are literally less than a week away from Warriors training camp starting. Now let me paint the full picture of what the Sportcenter crew was breaking down, because this is one of those situations where you've got to understand every layer of what's happening here. The analysts on the show were going through this Amick report line by line, and the details are absolutely fascinating. According to team sources, and this is the exact language they were using on the broadcast, there's still another scenario in play here, and it's the sign-and-trade deal with Sacramento that everyone thought was finished. But here's the kicker that had everyone on the panel shocked. While these two teams went more than a month without discussing this matter during the latter part of summer, team sources confirmed that talks between the two sides were renewed earlier this week. I'm sitting there thinking, this is exactly what I predicted would happen. And apparently I wasn't the only one, because the Sportcenter analysts were saying the same thing. They were explaining how as we got closer and closer to that qualifying offer deadline, one of these two sides, either Golden State or Kuminga's camp, was going to have to blink first. Someone was going to have to make a move, and lo and behold, here we are revisiting these conversations. The panel made it clear, though, that while the talks have resumed, no significant progress has been made yet. But what's absolutely remarkable, and this is what the crew kept hammering home, is that the Kings still haven't given up on the prospect of bringing Kuminga to Sacramento this season. Now, let's talk about what Sacramento has been offering, because this is where it gets really interesting and where the Sportcenter breakdown got into the nitty-gritty detail. The Kings have been dangling veteran guard Malik Monk and a lottery-protected 2030 first-round pick. Yeah, you heard that right, 2030. That's 5 years from now, for the chance to give Kuminga a 3-year, $63 million deal. The analysts on the show were really diving into this, asking the fundamental question that I think everyone needs to be asking: how badly do the Kings actually want Jonathan Kuminga? Because here's the strategic reality that the Sportcenter panel was explaining, and this is crucial to understanding why Sacramento might be so desperate to get this done now. If they do a sign-and-trade deal versus waiting to make a trade during the season, they have some major advantages. Number one, there's way less competition right now. If Kuminga plays well during the season, suddenly you've got multiple teams jumping into the bidding war, driving up the price. Number two, and this is something the analysts really emphasized, the Kings don't have a ton of contracts that would match up to whatever Kuminga is going to be making once that trade restriction gets lifted if he re-signs with Golden State. So the window is now for Sacramento, and they know it. But here's where the Sportcenter crew started breaking down the obstacles. And man, there are some serious hurdles to clear here. The biggest one? Golden State's interest in Malik Monk appears to be, and I'm quoting the report here, quite muted. The analysts were diving deep into why this is, and it all comes down to Monk's contract. He's got a player option for the 2027-28 season worth $21.5 million, and that absolutely does not fit with the Warriors' future flexibility plan. The panel explained that Golden State is looking at their salary cap sheet for 2027-28, and literally, the only players on the books are Buddy Hield's player option and Moses Moody. That's it. Curry, Draymond, and potentially Jimmy Butler. They're all off the salary cap sheet by then. The Warriors want maximum flexibility for that summer, and having an additional $22 million locked up in Malik Monk completely destroys that plan. Now here's where I think the Sportcenter analysis got really interesting, because they started pushing back on Golden State's position here. The analysts were saying, look, are the Warriors kind of disrespecting Malik Monk a little bit? Because let's talk about the fit on the roster, which apparently is also a concern for Golden State, though to a lesser degree than the contract situation. One of the analysts made this point that I thought was brilliant. Malik Monk would immediately become the second-best ball handler on this Warriors roster. He'd be the second-best on-ball creator, not named Stephen Curry. The guy has been a legitimate sixth man of the year candidate year in and year out. The show then pulled up footage from last season when Sacramento traded De'Aaron Fox over to San Antonio, and you could see Malik Monk taking on so much of that point guard responsibility. The panel was making the case that he's a player who would feel completely confident handling the rock and allowing Steph to work more off the ball. Plus, and this was another key point they made, Monk has shot the ball at a really efficient clip from the outside throughout his career. Sure, maybe not so much recently, but the analysts explained why. His volume has gone way up, and the defensive attention on him in Sacramento has been absolutely massive because he's been one of their primary options. Here's where the Sportcenter crew made what I thought was the most compelling argument. Imagine Malik Monk surrounded by Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green in Golden State. That defensive attention is going to be dramatically lessened. The analysts were saying his efficiency numbers would almost certainly go up in that situation, and honestly, I think they're right. But Golden State apparently doesn't see it that way, or at least the contract situation is such a deal-breaker that they're not even considering the on-court fit seriously. Now, let's get into the structural problems with this deal, because the Sportcenter panel spent a good chunk of time breaking down the mechanics of how this would even work. There's this provision that makes Jonathan Kuminga's new contract only half attainable by Golden State in terms of trade return. The Warriors can only take back 50% of whatever Kuminga's making in year one. So that means if Kuminga's making, let's say, hypothetically, $21 million in year one with Sacramento, Golden State can only receive back about $10.5 million in salary. But Malik Monk's contract is worth close to $20 million. I think the exact figure they mentioned was $17 million. So the math doesn't work for a straight one-for-one deal. The analysts explained that Golden State would have to include additional salary to get up to Malik Monk's contract level. And here's where it gets tricky. Buddy Hield and Moses Moody are the only players on Golden State's roster that could make this work mathematically. And according to Amic's reporting, which the Sportcenter crew kept referencing, Golden State has been strongly against including either one of those two in any deal that looks like this. So you've got this structural problem where the deal can't even be completed as currently constructed. But wait, it gets even more complicated, and this is where the show really dove into what it would take to actually get this deal across the finish line. The analysts were saying that if the Kings really want to make this happen, at minimum, and they stressed this, at minimum, Sacramento has to lessen the protection that's currently on their 2030 first-round pick. Right now, it's lottery protected, meaning it's top 14 protected. The Sportcenter panel was unanimous on this. That pick protection just doesn't entice the Warriors enough. Here's where the irony becomes almost comical, and the analysts on the show were having a field day with this. From the Kings' perspective, their stance throughout these negotiations has been that Jonathan Kuminga hasn't performed to a lottery standard so far in his career. That's supposedly their justification for keeping heavy protection on the pick. But then, as one of the analysts pointed out with this perfect sarcastic tone, your GM and your executives are probably the anonymous sources that have been putting out all that praise about Jonathan Kuminga in the media over the last couple of weeks. You're the ones openly and publicly trying to trade for him right now and make him a focal point of your team. So how much do you really believe he's not a lottery-level talent? The Sportcenter crew then started spitballing what an amended deal might look like. And this is where things got really interesting from a strategic standpoint. They were saying you'd probably need to get a third team involved somehow, but the basic framework would be Malik Monk, plus that first-round pick with lessened protection. They were thinking maybe top 8 protected instead of top 14, which gives you 6 picks of wiggle room. One analyst suggested maybe top 5 protected but they quickly shot that down, saying Sacramento probably wouldn't go for it. Top 3 protection? Definitely not happening. And then Kuminga, plus one of either Buddy Hield or Moses Moody, would be heading to Sacramento in this deal. But here's the fundamental problem that the show kept coming back to. And I think this is the crux of the entire situation. Golden State doesn't really want this deal. The panel was saying, you've got one of 2 things that needs to happen for this trade to materialize. Either all the protections need to be completely lifted off the pick, which seems unlikely, or a third team needs to get involved, or Sacramento has to completely rework their entire offer. The analysts then started exploring what other assets Sacramento might be able to include, and this is where things got fascinating. The Warriors have been connected to other Kings players throughout this trade cycle, specifically Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis. Both of these guys are young, ascending players that would fit Golden State's timeline and needs perfectly. But here's the absolute kicker that had the Sportcenter panel practically laughing. The Kings have reportedly made both Murray and Ellis untouchable in trade negotiations. Let me tell you, the analysts were absolutely incredulous about this. One of them said something like, "Wait, let me get this straight. The Kings are talking about making Kuminga a focal point of their offense. They supposedly believe he can be a multi-time All-Star, but they won't give up Keon Ellis for him? And look, as the panel explained, nobody's saying Keon Ellis is a bad player. He's a really good 3-and-D wing with legitimate upside. But if you genuinely believe Jonathan Kuminga can be a multi-time All-Star, how is Keon Ellis untouchable in that trade? The logic doesn't add up. Now here's where the urgency of the situation really came into focus, and the Sportcenter crew did an excellent job laying out the timeline here. There's a hard deadline approaching, and that's October 1st. That's when Kuminga could potentially accept his qualifying offer, and if he does that, everything changes. But the panel made this crucial point. The real deadline for these negotiations isn't actually October 1st. It's Monday, September 29th. Why? Because that's the day the Warriors report for training camp. That's when the media is going to start asking questions, when reporters are going to be all over this story, when the team needs to have their roster situation figured out. And here's what made this segment so compelling. The analysts started talking about just how unprepared Golden State is right now for training camp. The Warriors currently have 9 players on their roster. 9. That's literally against league rules for a training camp roster. They're holding a mini-camp right now with all these guys ready to sign once the Kuminga situation gets sorted out. But can someone please get this done? The panel was practically begging for resolution at this point, saying this team is missing valuable time for new faces to acclimate into what is admittedly a fairly complex system in Golden State. Then the show transitioned into discussing potential scenarios, and this is where the analysis got really nuanced. They laid out what they called win-win scenarios for both sides. Win-win number 1, the Warriors and Kings get a deal done this week. The analysts explained that it's become pretty clear at this point that Jonathan Kuminga doesn't want to be a Golden State Warrior. And to be fair, about 99% of the Warriors organization seems indifferent about whether he stays or goes. The only person who desperately wants him back is apparently Joe Lacob. So clearly, some kind of separation needs to happen. But then they presented win-win scenario number 2, and I've got to admit, I thought this was the more interesting possibility. A Western Conference executive was quoted in the segment saying that if Kuminga comes back to Golden State and they get off to a hot start, this could actually work out. They could end up reevaluating whether to keep him and see out whatever contract they agree to. But this scenario only works if Kuminga doesn't accept the qualifying offer, because if he does, Steve Kerr is not going to play him, or at least not nearly as much as Kuminga would need to be effective. This is where the Sportcenter analysis got brilliantly strategic. The panel pulled up Golden State's early season schedule, and man, it is brutal. The analysts were going game by game, and I'm telling you, they could legitimately start 0-5. I'm not saying they will, but there's a non-zero chance. Lakers, good team, kind of had Golden State's number last year. Nuggets definitely had their number, and they got better. Trailblazers, they've improved, added some young talent, and picked up DeJounte Murray. Grizzlies, still solid, still a threat. Clippers, and this might be the toughest one, they made more upgrades than anybody in the Western Conference. And oh yeah, this game is on October 28th, when everybody's still going to be healthy. The panel then walked through the rest of the early schedule, and the point they were making became crystal clear. Golden State has to basically go 4-5 or better through all these early stretches. They've got the Bucks with Giannis, games against the Pacers, Thunder, Spurs on a back-to-back, Pelicans. The analysts were stressing that you cannot be dropping games early in the season to teams that are clearly inferior to you, because there's real competition in these early matchups. Multiple games against the Thunder and Spurs is ridiculous scheduling. Here's where this all ties back to the Kuminga situation, and I thought this was the most insightful part of the entire Sportcenter segment. If Golden State gets off to a hot start, let's say they win 15 out of their first 20 games, suddenly, Kuminga's trade value goes way up. The analysts explained that if you're sitting at 15-5 after 20 games, now you've got people's attention. Now you're selling Jonathan Kuminga to prospective teams as a guy who's contributing to winning basketball, and his value in trade negotiations becomes significantly higher than it is right now. The panel even projected it out further. They said if Golden State goes 15-5 through their first 20, then maybe wins 10 out of their next 15, you're looking at a pretty solid 25-10 record heading into the calendar flip to 2026. At that point, Jonathan Kuminga is going to be viewed as a legitimate commodity around the league, and Golden State might be able to get substantially more for him than they would right now. And obviously, that makes sense from a contractual standpoint as well. His value rises as he shows he can contribute to winning on a good contract. The show wrapped up with the analysts asking viewers to predict what's going to happen. And honestly, I think that's the perfect question because nobody really knows how this is going to shake out. Does Kuminga take one of the deals Golden State has on the table? The 2-year, $45 million with a player team option? Or the 3-year, $75 million with a team option? Does he go rogue and just accept the qualifying offer, betting on himself? Or do the Warriors and Kings somehow come to an agreement by Monday and actually pull off this trade? What became abundantly clear from the Sportcenter coverage is that we're at a legitimate crossroads here. The next few days are absolutely critical for the Warriors' season, for Kuminga's career, and potentially for Sacramento's championship aspirations. This isn't just another trade rumor or off-season speculation. This is a situation that's going to define how multiple franchises approach this season. And with training camp starting in less than a week, resolution has to come soon. The clock is ticking, the pressure is mounting, and something's got to give. That's what went down on Sportcenter last night. And I'm telling you, this story is far from over. Whatever happens in the next 72 hours is going to have massive implications for the entire Western Conference landscape.